Hi, so this demo is all about colour pencils. I'm surprised I haven't done a video yet on colour pencils because I've realised that I really love them and I use them a lot. They are unlike graphite and charcoal pencils in that their core is a mix of wax or oil, pigment, binding agent and other additives. So they have been around for a long time. They actually have been around over 100 years. I think that Faber-Castell were the first people to market them back in 1908, and other manufacturers like Caran d'Ache and Beryl were soon to follow in the 1920s and 1930s. So before I get into more details about how to use them and different kinds of colour pencils, I just thought I'd show you a few pictures that I've done to show you the range of different effects you can get with them. So here is a purely coloured pencil, just colour pencils here, used completely dry. And here we have a sketchbook page, again just colour pencils used entirely dry. This one is actually half colour pencils, everything on the right side here. This is all colour pencils on brown paper, just on that sort of cheap wrapping paper that comes with your parcels, and that's actually pastels on that side. Here we have some more colour pencils on pastel matte paper, which I'll talk about more in a bit. Just colour pencils. So you can see you really can get a great range of different effects. They're good for landscapes, they're good for still lives, they're good for portraits. There really isn't anything that you can't do with colour pencils. They are particularly beloved of the pet portrait artists. Here we go, here are some pet portraits. This was just experimenting with different colour paper, which I will talk about as well in a bit. So there's a flavour of all the different effects that you can get with colour pencils. So, as I said, you can get colour pencils that have wax in them, colour pencils that have oil in them. It's not always possible to tell the difference, but you do notice that they have oil or wax in them when you start to build up a layer of them. So, obviously, if you use them very lightly, they have quite a matte quality. And then the more pressure you apply, the more intense that colour will be, and the stronger the tone will be as well. And the other thing that you will notice, the more pressure you apply, is that the wax or the oil in the pencils starts to deposit onto the paper and build up a waxy, glossy sheen. Now, this can mean that you can only go so far in terms of building up a layer of colour, because after you get a certain amount of colour on there, the wax and the oil have built up to such a degree that you can't put any more pencil on. And you see that as I just turn it to the light, you can see the luster coming out there. And that's what they're supposed to do, so don't worry if that happens. Obviously pencils vary massively in quality. Some of the signs of a good quality pencil, obviously the colour is intense, often the core is quite soft. If it's too hard, then that's often a sign there's more filler than pigment in there. So that's a sign of quality if they're nice and soft and the colour's intense. The range of colours as well can be an indicator of the quality. Coloured pencils often come in sets. The first set in 1908, the Faber-Castell Polychromos range, had 60 colours. As you can see from my set here in my pencil roll, I think I've got about 72 colours here, again, which is a sort of fairly typical range in a good set of pencils. These ones in my roll are Caran d'Ache, that are my personal favourites, just because I was given this set in fact, when I was about 15, and as you can see they're still going strong. You can see the colours that I've used more because there's not much left of them. I've had to replace some of the, well, I've had to replace the black and the grey, black and the white, and I've added to my set as well with a sort of Prussian blue, indigo. Actually, that was an indigo, I think. That's a Faber-Castell. Those ones are water soluble, which I'll talk about in a minute as well. And these ones are just ordinary non-water soluble colour pencils. People do say that the non-water soluble ones blend better. Let's just have a look, this comparing here. I personally don't really notice the difference between the non-water soluble and the soluble, but I probably work more with the water soluble than I do with the non-water soluble. So I couldn't particularly tell you that there was a huge difference, and certainly there isn't a difference in price if you're buying the same quality. Okay, so I mean they're slightly different colours, but I think the intensity is very similar, so I'll let you make your own decision about if there is differences between the water soluble and the non-water soluble when you're using them dry. Obviously when you're applying water to them, that definitely changes their consistency. In fact, let's have a look at that now. So this was the Derwent Ordinary set of colour pencils here, and I'm just going to apply some water with a water brush to that patch. Nothing at all. Even when I do a bit of smudging, there's really not much going on. However, when I apply water to the water soluble colour pencils, you can see a very different effect, that it dilutes that pencil and turns it into a wash, much more like a watercolour, although you can still see some of the lines that you laid down underneath. So a key difference between the water soluble ones and the non-water soluble. So other ways, I'm going to talk about techniques of how to blend and how to lay these down, but just to roughly talk about some advantages and disadvantages. Why would you choose colour pencils over other art media? well. They are cleaner, relatively simple to use. They can be combined with other art media as well, which is brilliant. I think they're more environmentally friendly, really, because they're not they biodegrade. They don't put too much into the into landfill as you're kind of creating your art, or into the water system. So yeah, I would say they're very environmentally friendly. They're easy to they travel well. They're easy to pack. They rub out as well. This is something that is, I think, quite an advantage. Let's just have a look at that quality they have of being erasable. So we'll lay down some lightly there and increase the pressure. And we'll just see at what stage, up until which stage you can rub them out. Okay, so a range there of different pressure. I've got my propeller rubber here because it makes a nice clean line. So there, through the lightest pressure, that rubs away quite nicely. Now let's try through the slightly heavier pressure. Might have to apply a bit more pressure. Again, you can rub back some there, and then finally through the heavy pressure. Yay, it's still coming off. Brilliant. I mean, it's not coming completely clean, not going back to the white paper, but it is rubbing back. So you could use that technique as a highlight, or if you've kind of made a bit of mistake, or if you're wanting to clean up around the edges of an area. Ooh, smudge. You can do that with a rubber. So lots of advantages there. I really do think they've got a lot going on for them. So what are the disadvantages? The disadvantages are definitely that they are quite slow to build up, and they take their time. Sometimes they require quite a lot of wrist pressure when you're sort of building up lots of layers and you want a really intense colour there. So yeah, they're time consuming and they can require a lot of wrist pressure. But apart from that, I can't see any disadvantages. You can buy them in sets of colour, you can build up your sets, you can add individual colours to your sets. So they're quite flexible in terms of building up a collection of the colours you need. You don't need loads and loads of colours either. You can just have a very limited palette and get a really effective range of colours, but I'm going to talk about that in a bit as well. So talked about watercolour pencils. Haven't talked about pastel pencils. I haven't actually got any to show you, but you may well have some. Pastel pencils are different to these colour pencils because they have less or virtually no wax or oil in their core. They're much crumblier, much drier. As a result, you can't sharpen them to the fine point that you can with colour pencils, and they tend to have a sort of thicker end. So precise detail you can't get with the pastel pencils, but you can smudge them, which is an advantage. And you can perhaps build up more layers with the pastel pencils because they're opaque as well, which means they're not transparent, so whatever you put down will show up and cover up the layer underneath it. So that's pastel pencils. They are definitely different in quality, and people divide between whether or not they like the ordinary colour pastels ordinary colour pencils or pastel pencils, and they can be used together as well with the colour pencils. They don't just have to be used on their own. So some techniques. The most common form of building up colour pencil is layering. So building up layer onto layer. So obviously, as I showed you before, you can intensify the tone and the colour by adding more pressure. You can, just the same as if you're working in pencil, you can work in one direction, or you can hatch across and build up intensity across in another direction. And again, similar to the pencil, if you hold it at a steeper angle to the paper, you're going to more likely to get lines. If you hold the pencil further back and at a much shallower angle to the paper, you're going to get the side of the pencil, so you're going to get less of a line and more of a sort of subtle tone like that. You really can hold it really far back. It's quite important to keep your pencil sharp. I'll just have a little chat about sharpness of pencils. Just be careful about which pencil sharpener you use, because it needs to be a good one. If it's a bad pencil sharpener and the blade of the pencil sharpener is a bit blunt, or there's sort of something in there, it's more likely to damage the slightly softer core than it would with a graphite pencil. So definitely keep them sharp. Some colour pencils are a bit fatter and require a fatter barrel to be able to sharpen them. But yes, always have them sharp, and then you can use them on the side or on the point for a fine line. So layering, just going to blend in an orange here, again hatching across, cross hatching to create a nice grid. Building up again, so you can see the colour is both becoming more intense and a darker shade as I add these colours into it. So in the same way that you might shade something in pencil, it's very similar with colour pencils. Just think of it in terms of shading with colour. And just like the colour pencils, the graphite pencils, you can go for depth of tone with pressure, or you can go for depth of tone with a darker pencil, and in this case a darker colour. Makes sense. So layering, I suppose, is the kind of classic way of blending colour pencils. Another way is burnishing. Now there's two different ways of burnishing. You can get a burnisher, which is sort of like this. It looks like a pencil, but it's sort of often made of a more rubbery type. The core is sort of like rubber. This one says it's water-based varnish. I'm not quite sure how on earth it can be that, but it is, you sort of use it to blend the layers that you've laid down, and it's supposed to produce a shiny surface. is actually taking off some of the layers there. I have to say, I've never got on particularly well with these, but it may be that I've just used the wrong things or used them in the wrong way. But yeah, if you have them, experiment with what they do. Another way of burnishing something is to use a lighter colour. So in this case, I started with a yellow, didn't I? So I could sort of come back in on top of that and blend the colours with a lighter colour. I mean, you'll get a burnishing effect anyway by releasing the wax and oil in that and building it up. You'll get that quality. So I want to talk about paper, different papers now, which papers are best to use. Generally smooth paper, which is exactly the same as advice that you would get with pencils, and the smoother and crisper the better. Obviously it doesn't need to be hugely thick if you're not adding any water, so you can get away with much thinner paper when you're using colour pencils than wetter media, which is an advantage. So white obviously is, as you can see, enables some colours to really show up well, but it's not always, white's not always the best colour paper to use. As you saw in some of my examples, sometimes colour paper, non-white paper, really helps to show up certain colours. If you use a brown or a grey or something like that, you can immediately use the white itself as a colour to work in. So think about if there's a lot of white in what you're trying to create, and maybe pick accordingly. This is, this sort of shows you how different colours show up on how they look different on different coloured papers. It kind of makes sense as well, because with the colour pencils that are sort of not opaque, they're translucent, so they show through some of the colour underneath. You can see how if it's a very strong colour that you're working on, that affects the colour that you lay down a lot, whereas if it's a very neutral colour, it affects the colours that you lay down less so. And here you can see the pastel colours, the colours with more white in them, show up particularly well on these darker colours. So yeah, think about experimenting with different colour backgrounds with colour pencils. Even a sort of neutral grey would be a really good place to start. The colour, what colours you need and what colours you don't need. When you're using pastels, you need a huge range of colours. When you're using colour pencils, it's more like watercolours or other water-based media. You can actually mix a huge range of colours with just a few colours. So, and that can actually look really good as well. So this colour wheel here, all the colours that you can see are created from just the three primary colours here, this blue, this yellow and this red, and everything else here is a mixture of those. And then for the real darks in the middle, these are mixtures of the opposite colours, the complementary colours, yellow and purple, blue and orange, red and green. So essentially they're a combination of all three primary colours, which you can see gives you lovely dark, colourful darks, as I call them. So I'm just going to show you a little experiment here with a primary triad. So with my yellow and my blue, and my red. Already just those three colours I can get a fantastic range of colours. So the red and the blue should when blended and layered together give me a purple, although this red is not ideal for purples. It needs to be a slightly more violety red in the first place. And the blue and the yellow should give me a green. When you're layering up like this, people often ask which colour do you put down first? Is there a right and wrong way? No, I would say is the answer to that. But you can obviously affect the balance of colour by how strongly you lay down the layers and which ones you put down last. So that's good, that's looking green. And then obviously red and yellow will give us orange. Yellow obviously is not as strong a colour, it's both lighter and generally not as intense, so you have to use more of the yellow in comparison, and certainly use more pressure to blend it. So they're a very rudimentary example of the sort of primary colours, the secondary colours, and then obviously the tertiary colours would be mixtures in between those colours, giving the whole spectral range. And then in the middle we'll show you just how dark we can get with all three colours. So my challenge to you, I guess, is if you're using colour pencils, don't start with the whole range of colours like mine. A much better way to get to know your colour pencils is to just start with three. Now obviously depending on the three that you choose, the three colours, you'll get very different sort of mixtures of those colours. So for example, you might want to choose that red instead of that red, and if you choose a darker blue, if you choose that blue instead of that blue, it's going to, you know, again change the range that you can get. But try with just one of each colour and see how you get on. So I just wanted to compare blending through dry layering with the colour pencils and blending through fusing with watercolour, with water, the water soluble colour pencils. So I've done another colour wheel here with my three colours, my primary triad there, yellow, red and blue, and I've gone and built up successive layers which have sort of given that lovely sort of rich sheen, and in towards the middle where all of those colours have blended for a nice dark there. So here we've got the yellow and the blue, and here I've just mixed them by layering them, and here just side by side I'm going to show you how to mix them by just clean that off mixing them with water. So as you saw before, once you add the water, those colours definitely start to move about and mix. There we go. Sometimes adding water makes them more intense as a colour. You can see the yellow there has changed colour a little bit as I've added the water, sort of become, well, certainly changed colour, it's mixed with the blue, but it's also changed colour in that it has become a little bit more intense. So, but there we can see that actually a much stronger colour has been created through hand mixing, just dry mixing there. Same, let's try with the yellow and the red here. You can see when I add the water to the red how much more intense it becomes, and then just mixing it in with the yellow there. So usually adding water dilutes something, it takes away the intensity of the colour, but in this case with the colour pencils it sometimes makes it stronger. So there we go, that's comparing mixing with the water by mixing just by layering. I was going to say, with the water soluble colour pencils, some people use them by dipping them into water and then drawing with them, which again you'll get a nice strong effect, but I do find it tends to have a sort of bad effect on the core. It sort of tends to make the core even softer and then harder to sharpen, so I don't tend to use them by dipping them, so I just use them dry and then, as you saw, add the water afterwards. But both are possible, and I just don't find it quite so good for the pencils to dip them. And also just to be careful, if your paper is wet, that you don't work into them when it's still wet, because that will destroy the surface of the paper as well. So just if you have added water like this to fuse the colours, then just allow that to dry completely and then you can work back in on top of it. So just to say one or two more things about this paper, which is pastel matte paper, a paper specially formulated for using pastels with. It's got a sort of textured but smooth surface, almost like very, very smooth sandpaper, which takes colour pencils really well, and it comes in a range of colours. As you can see, you've got the sort of maroony colour there and a sand colour there, but yeah, the colour pencil stays on really nicely on there, and as you can see, you can use the lighter colours because it's not white, and they show up as well, and you can use them very finely. So that's Pastel Matte Paper by Clairefontaine. And then just to finally talk about mixing colour pencils, what you can mix them with. I talked about how you can mix them with other media. Obviously you can mix colour pencils with watercolour. You can put them underneath watercolour, on top of watercolour. You can mix them, you can use them on top of acrylics. You can mix them with inks and ink pens. And you can mix them with pastels. They don't work brilliantly on top of pastels, but side by side with pastels they work well. And then obviously once you've laid down the colour pencils, you can add things like gel pens, fibre pens, pencils, charcoal, anything like that can go on top of colour pencils as well. So they really are very versatile.